Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are doing our complete coverage of Outpost Zero Volume 2, Follow It Down. I'm just going to start off by saying, I don't know if it's because I was a big reader as a kid, and I really trailed off on like elective voluntary reading as a high schooler and middle schooler.
Yeah, you and me both.
But and then I picked it up again as an adult, but I didn't read fiction again until I was like 30. That's when I got into like fiction, comics, all this stuff. But it could be that I'm just so miss when that age group was written for me that I still live vicariously through. But I just love this book. I mean, I love following small scale characters around, Scooby-Dooing.
Yeah,
and
that's a great word, great verb. There. No, I agree. I think when I read something like this, I don't want to use the term like simpler. I don't mean it's a pejorative though. I mean that as a strength, in that it's pretty straightforward. There's a mystery,
elegant in its simplicity. Yeah,
there's a mystery. You got to go solve it. And yeah, it's setting it with younger characters, with teens. Yeah, for me, it takes it back. I mentioned a bunch of times, growing up, like Goonies was one of my favorite movies. Like it's a hugely important movie that I watched over and over and over again. It's probably in the top 5 in my life of movies I've seen over and over again, assuming we count the original Star Wars trilogy as one movie. Because growing up,
sure, because it can't have 3 spots.
Well, also because growing up, we had it on one extended play VHS tape, all 3 movies back to back to back, and so you couldn't just watch one. You just had to rewind all the way to the beginning and watch the whole thing. If you started watching Star Wars, you pretty much had to watch all the way to the end of Jedi. So in my mind, it's always one movie. But yeah, if you give those 3 movies one spot, like Goonies is up there, and this is that sort of thing. Again, it's the thing we talk about with Stranger Things. I mean, Stranger Things obviously has this cultural impact. It started out really because it was this 80s nostalgia, right? The Duffners were really tapping in and putting a lot of that in there. And so people of, I guess, maybe my generation, maybe slightly older than yours, who have fond memories of that, connect with that. But at its heart, it's the same story. It's Goonies, it's E.T. Again, Paper Girls, the first book we covered on this show, has that same sort of feel to it. And again, while this is not nearly as dense as something like Paper Girls, if you're open and willing to let yourself kind of be transported back into that mindset, that time frame, that era of your life, and go along in the adventures of kids that are, I guess they're 14 here, you can find it, I think, incredibly enjoyable. And like I think you said, like, live vicariously through that. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels a lot like the first 2 Harry Potter books, where it's, like kids snooping around, discovering a bigger mystery in the world around them.
Before the lore got really heavy, because that really starts in the 3rd book. The 3rd book is like, I think, like the most adult book, because that's where the format changes. Because you're right, the first two books, format wise, are incredibly similar. Like the beats happen at the same time.
Oh yeah, everything's laid on a predictable structure.
It's laid out very formulaic. And of course, those books I think were intended in a lot of ways to grow with the reader. So you read those first 2 books when you're 11, 12 years old. And
absolutely,
you get,
they level
you get middle
up
school
with the
grade.
reader.
Yeah, you get middle school age, and you get a little more. You get a little deeper. The lore becomes a little more complex. So you get to the end. I agree entirely. Yeah, it's just it's that mix of adventure and coming of age. And it doesn't matter if it's set in a fantasy world, a sci-fi world, if it's set in our world, those themes are resonant, and they carry true across genre.
Yeah. So what did you think specifically of this volume? Just well, I guess we'll start at the kind of the 10,000 foot view.
Sure. I like this volume because I think it really expands on some important things, not so much that were left unsaid, but it starts to expand the world out while focusing in on what this mystery is, on whatever it is that Sam and Aaliyah are focused on. What they're trying to uncover. We got that tease at the end of volume 1, again, with like the 50, 60 cats down there and some like giant looming shadow. It starts opening the door on that, but you get a wider view of the world, and we see more of just kind of what it's like, and what it would be like living in this bubble, what kind of existence it would be, and what kind of society you would make. And I think the first thing that I really liked about it was, so in the first volume, I talked about how through our four main kid characters, we saw four distinct and very real reactions to the loss of a friend, loss of a loved one, in terms of how they reacted to Steven's death. We talked about how Sam, already being kind of introverted and shy, just really, really goes inward, and he doesn't have a lot of friends, if any at all. And without Steven there, he really turtles up. You have Mitchell, who turns to rage and lashes out. He's angry at this. He's angry at Steven, angry at the world. And of course, we find out here that's fueled by something a little more. You had Liz, who not so much dismisses it, but I think you talked about following the party line. The idea of like her quick to acceptance is kind of reflective of the society of like, hey, this happens a lot, not the first person to die, not the first person to die by suicide, won't be the last. It just kind of happens. It's you kind of accept it and move on. And she's like, it's almost like she's past it as soon as it happened, and she's just focusing on the time that she had with Steven. And then finally, you have Aaliyah, who goes into detective mode. As you're describing
this, do you realize you're describing the stages of grief?
100%.
But each one of them is taking,
absolutely, 100%. And so, Aaliyah is like, the only way I can cope with this is if I figure out why. And so we have each four of those characters were given a different reaction. And here we're shown another one in Mitchell's twin sister, Maddie. Now, of course, her reaction, her kind of being, we see that she's basically she's high the whole time. Whatever this drug is, she's completely whacked down on it 24/7 all day. And that's the only way she can deal with this existence. Now, we find out that's in reaction to Maddie and Mitchell's mother taking her own life. So not specifically to Steven, but it's the same sort of reaction. And it's the kind of thing you would see here, where that is another way of coping, the idea of self-medicating through some other, outside substance, because you feel that the real world, the emotions you're feeling and thinking, the thoughts in your head, you can't deal with it. So you have to escape somehow. So, and by showing us Maddie there, we see a little more of where Mitchell was coming from when he lashed out at the memorial service, the funeral for Steven, about he was selfish. He was a coward, like everyone's out here doing their part, and he just made it harder for everybody else. You look back on that now, you look back on that issue from volume 1 with new eyes here, seeing that he's not really talking about Steven. He's talking about his mother, because his mother left. His mother chose to take her own life, and that made it harder on him. That made it harder on his father. That made it harder on his sister. And so you see that reaction, and you get a better understanding of him. And even then, I think in here he eventually kind of sends an apology, being like, listen, like, I shouldn't have done that. And I think you see his friends, you see Liz and you see Aaliyah, that they have a level of understanding, because obviously they know his situation. They know what he's going through. I think they know in the moment he didn't really mean it, because they know his circumstance. They know what he's dealing with. So his circumstance is different than theirs. And so I don't say like quick to forget or forgive, but there is a level of empathy that they have for their friend, because they know Steven's death triggered a reaction in him that does not exist in them.
Right.
There's a level of empathy for their friend there. And I liked how they showed that, because I think all those reactions and the way that each of those kids are portrayed, and how they're working through their grief and their loss, I think that's really real. And I mentioned last week that I went through a similar situation growing up. Again, it wasn't a death by suicide, but one of my best friends was killed in a car accident 3 weeks after he graduated high school. So at this moment of your life, when it's about moving on to the next bigger and better, greater things, one of my best friends was gone. And so
that's myself, also, not to project, but I feel like that's the peak age, maybe just for guys, of feeling invincible.
I will miss
And it just
entirely.
shatters
Oh
that
yeah,
illusion. Yeah.
all through high school there was an arrogance and a cockiness to me, specifically me and my friends. There's that invulnerability is absolutely real. That feeling, and it shattered right then. That the thought that like this is not supposed to happen to us. And so, having gone through that with me and my friends, and dealing with that, and having dealt with that now, whenever I read any sort of fiction that covers that sort of topic, it's something that I'm attuned to read into the other characters and feel like, does this feel real? Do these reactions feel real? Not to saying that what I experience with myself and my friends are the only reactions to have,
Sure.
but it's just the idea of, do these feel like real people and real characters? And I've read plenty of books, plenty of stories where that's not the case, and then there are the ones that get it right in my mind, that these characters feel like real kids, in terms of that they would swing wildly from being sad and depressed to almost acting like it didn't happen, because you don't know how to process it, and being someone like Aaliyah, who the only way they can deal with it is by digging into figuring out what happened, find the answers, things like that. It's that stuff rings very true to me. The desire to shrink away from the world and be like Sam, the desire to find an outlet like Maddie, the feeling of anger, as a replacement for your grief and your loss, like Mitchell. It's all that stuff rings true to me. And so when I see it in fiction, especially when I see it in stories that are aimed and geared towards that age group, that younger audience, that YA readership, I think it's notable and worthwhile, because those are the things you never want to have to experience, but you have to accept that they're things that kids do experience. And so to see it portrayed in a what I think is an honest way is important in a book like this. And so I was happy when I read this, and going back and reading it, that that specific thing held up for me, that I felt that those kids reacted like kids. They didn't react like adults would. They reacted like kids. They reacted like kids who lost a friend. And that's something that's incredibly important to me when I read stories of this nature.
Yeah. I have experienced, at this point now, so many friends who died. I didn't have any 3 weeks after high school, although I did have one die while I was in high school. And then several in college, and several since then, and for a whole variety of reasons, and including suicide. And I have a high sensitivity to, are you using this mechanic in a cheap way that cheapens my experience?
Yes.
And things I know to be true, or are you using it with some authenticity? And it feels very well earned here.
Yes, I think that's a great point. I think it's a great word, sensitivity. The idea of what is this being used for? Why did you feel the need to put this in your story? Is it just to do it, or are you trying to, I don't want to say teach a lesson, but that's really what it is, right? Are you trying to show something out of it? Is it just for the shock value of doing it, to put your characters through something, or is there a greater story or reason for it?
Right.
And I agree with what you said wholeheartedly, that I think Outpost Zero treads that line carefully and well, to where it doesn't feel like a cheap stunt. Like it's important that it happened, and it's important that these kids have gone through it, because that's going to be part of the maturation process.
Yeah. So anyway, that was on the macro scale, I think that registers huge for me. And I think some people, I kind of thumbed through the populist reviews, not necessarily critical ones, but, going through Goodreads and other places to see what people thought of this book. And I think some people that didn't like it, didn't connect. Like one guy I was just reading before we got on the air, that I may have been venting technically. But he said he didn't like it. He was like, oh, the whole thing, he was talking about volume 1. He's like, the whole thing was framed around like the death of this kid. And I don't know why I'm supposed to care about it. Like, we didn't even get to know that kid. And I was like, you completely missed it, man. Like,
Yeah.
it's about the impact that event had
Yeah.
on our protagonists. Like the whole story is set in the shadow of that suicide. It's not, we're not supposed to feel sad necessarily about that guy.
Yeah. It's not about him per se. It is about the reaction to that. It's the literal kick up. What happens at the end of the first issue, like that's the motivating factor. And it's about how, and it's not about how the society deals with it, how the colony does, because again, the assumption in the presentation is that this happens on unfortunately, like a somewhat regular basis for them. Right. So it's not about how the society does. It's about how these 4 kids deal with it. It's the journey for these 4 kids and their coming of age story. And so I think, but I can see that. I can see how people would miss that in that, maybe if you thought, and this goes back to, I think things we talked about both in the Zero episode and last week, there was, I guess a level of confusion maybe in terms of how this book was marketed or ended up being marketed. Because I read it because I thought the art looked great. I didn't know who Sean Kelly McKeever was. Obviously, didn't know who Alexander Chafenke was. I think I saw some preview art. I thought it looked great. I loved it, and so I jumped in. But it's a book from Skybound Image, and not that all of their stuff is like a quote unquote mature reader line, but like that's the stuff that I see that I associate with them. Stuff. This is
definitely Skybound's first print or first publication in this format, right?
I think so. I think so. Where they've pivoted to being a YA story, because in my mind, again, Kirkman, it's Kirkman's line, so that's all of Kirkman's stuff. Walking Dead, Invincible, Oblivion Song, Outcast. Those were mature titles. Daniel Warren Johnson stuff, Murder Falcon, Extremity. Those are mature titles. Josh Williamson, Birthright, Dark Ride. All these are more mature titles. Again, not saying that that's all Skybound is, but in my mind, I'm thinking that. So I get a book like this, and I remember being caught off guard, but also thinking like, what, I'm in. I like this, and so I think it had a hard time. Outpost Zero did coming out in single issue because I don't know if they knew how to market it to where the audience was. And so again, I go back to the idea that this collected edition is now in a digest format, which again, that is a clear and an obvious signal that of who we're trying to get to read this book. It's not that they're trying to not have an older audience read it. But I know I am not apt to pick up a digest size book simply because in my mind, okay, you know what, that's a YA book. So that's for someone that is quote unquote for someone younger than me. And maybe that's a little myopic on my view. And as a result, I haven't read a lot of YA comics. But I think a book like this would benefit from that, take it out of the, I guess like regular graphic novel section at your comic shop,
right.
Take it out of the image section and put it with the younger stuff, quote unquote younger stuff, put it in that section. So a kid walking in who's 12, 13, 14, something like that, sees it. They see that gorgeous cover, the new cover art with that kind of neon stylized coloring. It's going to jump out at them. Like that's the people.
Although the massive robot to me feels like a spoiler on the front cover. And now that we're on volume 2, I can say that because we've now met the robot a little bit.
Yes, that is true. That's a little strange, but I don't think that matters to people.
No, it doesn't matter to the story. It's just when you see a large looming thing at the end of the first volume, you're like, oh, it must be the big robot.
Yes, but that no longer matters because it's all collected in one issue. It's all one thing. And again, in that collection, that's not the end of it. At the end of a chapter, so you read that all the trades are chapters, right? So you read that
that's
first
like
chapter.
Saying, the Harry Potter books are spoiled because he has a wand on the front cover of the first one, and he doesn't even get his wand until a third of the way through the book. It's like, no, that's not really.
Like
that's not the game we're playing.
When you read in single issue, you get that cliffhanger of like, oh, why are these cats here? What's that thing? What's that giant shadow there? But you realize it's not about the reveal. The fact that it's a giant robot down there tending to these cats isn't important. What's important is why there's a giant robot down there tending to these cats. So it shifts your perspective on what that cliffhanger means. And so, you put the giant robot on the cover and, so you get that first chapter and you're probably thinking, oh, that's a giant robot. but you still have the proper question. The proper question is, why is there a giant robot down there in the depths tending to all these cats? That's the important thing. That's the focus, not the, oh my God, there's a giant robot here. So I think it still plays. I think it still reads, and I think it still puts the reader in the right frame of mind. That is assuming the reader is unlike you and they see the giant shadow and aren't just focused on the room full of cats. Right.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Look, Hemingway would have made the same mistake as me.
Okay, if that's company you want to keep on in this case, I guess,
yeah,
that's good for you. Good for you.
I was drinking like Hemingway while I was reading. Yeah. So starting at the beginning of this one rather than at the end with the robot, the two complaints I had about the first volume, first chapter, however you're breaking it down,
sure,
were that there were it's like a group of 4. And what I love about it is that we're not just serial introducing a bunch of random characters whose names we need to remember. There's a couple new ones in this volume, but not really. Like, it's still focused on our 4. Yes. But we didn't do much service to I'm forgetting her name out because it's a little different. This is Lass.
Well, Liz. I pronounce it Liz. I call it Liz. Yeah.
It's Liz and Mitchell. Were underserved in volume 1.
Yes.
So what does the first section of chapter 2 do? Jump straight into Liz, getting her blades, and then we get Mitch's fight, and then we see him go home with his sister, who we've already mentioned, has a substance abuse problem of some kind, and we see him being the nurturer, protector.
Yeah.
And you realize all his lashing out is him trying to protect what is sacred, what is important to him.
We see his father as well, and his father, I don't want to say he's checked out, but one can surmise that after his wife is died, his existence is just get up, farm, come back home, and that's it. Like his whole existence now, like you see, he has like very little to no connection or action with either of his children. It's like he's now a shell of himself, and so it falls on Mitchell to take all that burden on. Which I think you then see, like, why would he choose to go and be a fighter? Well, maybe that's the only thing he feels he can do, because it's something he has to do, because he now has to take on the role of head of house. Right. He has to take care of himself. His father, again, who seems to just checked out, he's just lose himself in work, and his sister, who was obviously checked out and is just laying in bed getting high all day. So no, I think that's an astute observation. And one thing I mentioned last week was about the title pages, the recap page.
Yeah,
the
which I don't have.
The silhouettes at the bottom here, and I mentioned that towards the end of that first arc, when Aaliyah and Sam start working together, they get grouped together, and now the gap is between the two of them and Liz and Mitchell. And so it kind of makes sense that that first arc would focus on our main characters, quote unquote main characters, are the two doing the investigating, and Liz and Mitchell being on the outside,
right,
less served. There's a visual representation on that title page. And then as Aaliyah and Sam bring Liz into their kind of scheme, because they need her help, because Liz is now,
which means the investigation is kind of the main character.
Exactly.
And it's the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And your centrality is an ornament based directly on how much you tie to that.
Exactly. So once that happens, you see on the title page, Liz is now grouped with Aaliyah and Sam, and there's now a gap between the three of them and Mitchell. So once again, we have this representation of that group of 3 working together and Mitchell on the outside. And I think we see a lot of that in Mitchell, and I'm glad we got more of both of their stories. I guess it goes a little further. You had talked about last week about what sense does it make in a society like this that the main form of recreation is like beating each other to a pulp.
Yeah,
and I guess it just comes down to the idea of
it's cathartic.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. It's just it's a release, not just for the people involved, but like I think when they go to his fight, I think Aaliyah is there with Sam, right? And Aaliyah, you can tell, is like super hyped for them, not just because her friend is fighting, but she's like, yeah, man, I love the fights. Used to go all the time as a kid, so that it's cathartic. It's a release not just for the fighters, but for the audience as well, for the whole society, that it's a way for them to get out anything that maybe they're holding back for that moment of escape. And yeah, I think what we see in Mitchell, that there's a catharsis for him in the physical act of both delivering and receiving violence, which I think is not uncommon and would make sense for a child.
It's
growing
completely
up in
plausible.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of like, what do the town elders think of this? As I was reading through volume 2, I kind of thought, this seems like they might be capable of pulling off clearly they've been lied to about their origins here.
Yes.
And it seems like they might be capable of pulling off a Planet of the Apes style twist where, they tried to reverse global warming, they froze the earth, and then it went horribly wrong, and now they're stuck in this little bubble or something like that.
Now they're trying to cover it up, like they crash land.
But it seems more hopeful to say you're colonizers of a new world.
Yeah.
And then I was like, whether it does or doesn't do that, it doesn't really matter. Like, that wouldn't be the main point.
Yes.
Because what they uncover in this investigation isn't the point. The point is about
cover up at all.
But it's really about, like, what is humanity's purpose? Is it to cling on and survive as long as you can?
Yeah.
Or is it to explore and discover and thrive and become vibrant?
Which is an idea that was introduced in the first volume.
And it's fallen into the backdrop here.
A little bit, yeah.
Definitely Aaliyah's motivation.
100%.
And Sam comes alive. He's like a totally different character when he's working on this.
Because he has that partial hologram, of that young girl giving her testimonial. He gets the first part of it, and then it craps out on him. And so he wants to find out what that is, because he wants to know what this, what the GAP is. He wants to know, why is this buried? What's here? He wants to discover that. He wants to. It's a weird tension, I think, because Aaliyah's whole thing is discovery, but her big thing really is the discovery of what's new, what's coming next. She's forward looking. Sam is backwards looking. He wants to know what this was. Why don't we know about it? His discovery is going in the other direction, and we see some of that pull. Once they get down into the lower levels, when they meet the robot, we see that tension there of Sam is. You're right. Sam does come alive. He comes out of his shell. And he gets very excited and very into it. But again, he's going in one direction. He is hell-bent on finding more about the history. He wants to discover that, while Aaliyah is looking forward, because that message we got from Steven to Sam was that what he was saying that Sam and Aaliyah have to save everybody, and so in Aaliyah's mind that means what's next. That's about the future. So we got these two.
How many times can you say what's next to
Yeah.
bait me into a West Wing reference.
Unintentional that time there. But see, but you get those opposing forces there, you know? They're both on the quest of discovery, but they're pulling in opposite directions here. One's looking back, one's looking forward. And I think that's a really interesting and compelling setup here, that it is two sides of that same coin. They're both there wanting a similar resolution or finding. It's just,
yeah. I mean, and they're both equally unhappy with the status quo in the bubble.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's
it's
an undeniably huge part.
It's the same motivation that what we have now isn't enough. And so Sam is looking for, well, how did this start? And maybe that's the reason we need to keep living. And Aaliyah is looking for, well, what's next? And keep going forward. Maybe that's what we need. And so I said, I like that tension between the two of them, that they're on the same page, but not quite. You know, they're on different sides of the same page.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's basically where our four characters are.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything to say really about Karen? I think at this point, it's like she has enough screen time that she's like worthy of comment. she doesn't strike me as a pure evil play, even if
Oh,
she is the
definitely not.
opposition.
Yeah, definitely not. No,
But she, she definitely loves her
well,
son.
I do have one note here about that, and I didn't tie it into um what you had just mentioned before. We were just talking about this idea of what's the point of this colony, like what's the point of living here. But now that we're talking about it, it makes sense. The revelation we find about Karen is that, the reason she has a connection with Sam is because years ago she had been in love with the man who would be Sam's father, but she didn't
Right.
want to. She didn't want to have kids, and
Oh
so
yeah. Now that was an interesting
yeah,
exchange.
yeah, because so the idea that she roped the Dr. Z, into this scheme where he basically lied and said that she was infertile and couldn't have kids, which then meant that relationship was over. And then Sam's father moved on to the woman who'd be Sam's mother. And of course, when they both die, I think Karen has a sense of, I don't know about guilt or regret or whatnot, but that's a reason why she takes him in and basically adopts him as her own. But I think that brings up, that connects to that point of like, what's the point of living in this colony? Like, if you aren't a procreator, what are you doing? Right?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, he felt guilty, and the doctor felt guilty receiving health care.
Yes.
He was like, I'm eager to become dirt again. And at least I'm providing some function.
That's
like,
right.
This is a highly utilitarian
that.
society.
Yeah. But you think about this, you think about that society in that bubble and how it's existed for, I guess, 200 some odd years of, the whole cycle of life and death, meaning you have to create life and then you're going to die eventually. So like,
right. But your goal while you're alive is to sustain life.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And if you're going to die eventually and you're in a hospital bed, like Dr. Z is, like, is it worth the resources to keep me alive simply to live? Because that's all he's doing in the hospital, right? He can't do anything else.
He's basically in hospce.
Yeah, he can't be the doctor that he used to be because he's bedridden or chair ridden, whatever. So he is only existing just to exist. And is that worth everything else? And so with those two characters, I think you get that sense of what does it mean to be part of the society? And I think kind of an unspoken thing. One thing they obviously they don't touch on here, and maybe it didn't come up in the way they were creating the story, but the idea of like, what about LGBTQ plus people in society? Right. Because again, if the idea is we are stuck here, we're never leaving here, and the whole point is make more people, keep the colony going, then there is a pressure, a societal pressure to have children. Like it becomes the responsibility, just like being on the planning team, security team, service team, medical team, whatever it is. When you grow up and you're assigned a job and a function for the whole colony, part of that function has to be to create more people to keep the colony going. And you see some of that in Karen, of her, this kind of hidden shame that she lied about not being have children because she didn't want them. It was a selfish choice. I don't want to have children. So how does that affect the society if you have someone opting out?
Right. That would be like the greatest sin you could commit there, right?
Yeah. Is choosing not to have a child. Yeah. To actively say, I am not going to further the future of this colony, because that's how they would see it, right? The colony would have to, in order to sustain this long, it would have to view that as a necessary means. You have to have more people. Everyone just can't get old and die. You have to have a next generation and a generation after that. And so that societal pressure, I think, again, is another wrinkle on the idea of what the hell are we doing here? What is this for? Are we living just to live? Are you living just to be of service of everyone else? Or is there something out there that makes life worth living? And that's what we're starting to see. And that you're right. It's less of a main theme, but that's still the through line through the whole story.
Right. Yeah. To me, that's kind of the subversive underpinning of the series, where it's like, your attentive reader will realize those are the gears that make everything move. but I think you could miss that, and it's still a perfectly enjoyable story. About these characters who have a lot of drive.
Oh,
but I think it will make sense, like if Karen ever finds out what Sam and Lee are up to, almost inevitability.
Yes. Yeah.
And she finds out their motivation.
Mm-hmm.
You could see her switching sides very easily, being like, oh, well, they really want to discover and express themselves and learn.
Yes.
And they're not happy in these rote roles, just treading out as much life as we can have.
It's similar to what we talked about in the first volume with Aaliyah's mom, being that understanding of like, she doesn't know what Aaliyah's up to, but she knows she can't be a function to the society until she gets whatever this is out of her system, until she follows that. She recognizes that Aaliyah has this drive, and instead of stifling that and maybe not totally encouraging it, at least condoning it, letting her go and follow this path of discovery, because obviously Aaliyah's parents are on the discovery team. That's in their nature. So her being supportive, saying, go take care of whatever you need to take care of. Go follow this impulse, because I know that if you don't do this, if I don't give you the space to do this, you're going to be distracted, and then you're no use to anybody. And so, I think it is safe to assume that someone like Karen, who obviously is like, I guess we assume she's the head of the planning committee or the security, which is pretty high up there. The choices that she makes affects the literal survival of everyone in the colony. So, but I think you're right in saying that in the inevitable finding out, because that's the natural conclusion of this sort of adventure mystery story, that she's going to find out because they're working so hard to keep her in the dark. She's going to find out. So when she does, I think you're right to assume that she is a character that would be open to seeing beyond just, you broke the rules, you shouldn't have done that. She's open enough to seeing that there might be another way, there might be more out there. It puts her in a tough position being the head of security team, but I think she would be willing, because she does have this love for Sam, even though there's this running thing of like, Sam still calls her Karen, doesn't refer to as his mom, doesn't see her that way, even though there is a connection there, but Sam being so insular and so introverted, there's no outward connection there. So that Karen now really wants, and again, that feeds back into that. I think her, that initial shame of when she was younger, of not wanting kids and roping in the doctor to make sure that doesn't happen. There's a part of her, I think, now looks at Sam and realizes that maybe Sam could have been her biological child, and then also I think there's this reckoning of, at this point, maybe it doesn't matter, maybe it doesn't matter in this society, whether or not that is your biological child or not. She loves him and wants to see him succeed and wants what's best for him, both now and in the future for the colony. So I think we're starting to see a little more to her, that, because she's definitely not a villain. She's not the bad.
No, but in volume 1, I just assumed, she's going to be the one suppressing all of the secrets, the villain. So I thought it was a nice complexity, and it was a nice, for lack of a better word, twist. I be revealed as like,
twist isn't the right word.
She might actually be more on the side of our characters than we think she is.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, twist isn't the right word I would use, but I know what you're trying to say there. I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah. It's driving me crazy not to think of a better word than twist. Wrinkle?
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, a great beat. And again, what I have to say about this is some of the books we've read this year on the podcast are so dense and opaque.
Yeah.
That, I'm impressed with anyone who hangs with us, just because, one, I think our reading choice has been somewhat eclectic, but it's also been pretty challenging.
But there are a lot of themes there. There's a lot of time travel, meaning a lot of time paradoxes and things like that. There's a lot of meta reading, a lot of stories about stories and storytelling. We've covered that a lot too. Those are, for me, those are books that I really enjoy and really love.
A lot of things out of chronological order in storytelling.
Yes.
And I got to say, this is a book to me that a lesser writer would have scrambled the order of events randomly in different issues or chapters, something like that, to spice it up. And to me,
how so? Like on the current, because when you said that, the first thing I thought of was, a different creative team would have maybe each issue given you like a few pages of flashback to the original crash, the original ship,
the original crash, or like
this earlier time,
or they would have revealed
like random flashbacks. Because I know,
or like the beginning of the very first page here could have been Sam and Aaliyah doing the jump to parallel the beginning of volume 1. And then you say, well, that's not where we left Sam. How do we get there with Sam? And
I see. And
then just doing like
back.
kind of cheap teases and, scrambling the order. And I think that's a crutch for a lot of writers. And the thing that I'm always asking when I read a story like that, where it just seems to be out of order for the sake of being out of order, is like, well, if I put it all in order, is it an interesting story? Because if it isn't, work, then it's not an interesting story when you scramble it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Now, thematically, sometimes you can draw points. Like my guy Jeff Lemire has never told a story purely in chronological order. And I'm with the caveat that some of the time play he does is flashbacks.
Yes.
Which is that's different than just telling it out of order, Tarantino style.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm thinking of. It's like, the Pulp Fiction thing where
I was thinking
the last
Pulp Fiction was the first
thing
that was first in the part of my head as well. Yeah.
Or Lost. Lost was very big on that. And I think Lost was very influential for a lot of like sci-fi twisty writers.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of people have just picked up and mimicked that without a lot of like forethought. And as I'm going through it, it's like Paper Girls doesn't really do that. I mean, there's a lot of time stuff, but it's all logical time stuff because you're in real time with the characters almost exclusively. You're in real time or dream sequences. Grass King's pretty linear. Mm-hmm. Underwater Welder is a fusion of flashback and reality. But that's also purpose.
That's also kind of the point of that book of the fluidity of time as our character is going back and forth and he's not certain, is this real or not? Yeah, that's kind of the whole point of that.
Yeah. Then you look, Kill or Be Killed. It's got some flashback in it. There's some. Well, and the whole thing is technically a flashback.
That is true. That's a good point
in terms of narration. And so it's like, well, the narrator knows things, all the things. And it's just revealing it to us in this chosen order. Flintstones, the only thing we nitpicked in that entire series was the opening pages.
Yes, that cold open.
Set up as a flashback. So I'm just like, I'm going through the books that we've done, and I'm like, I've got a particular taste. I think the one that feels most scrambled for the sake of being scrambled was Umbrella Academy.
Yes.
There were a lot of things in there where it was just like, this is just to be artsy or confusing. Now, like in Dallas, it was all done perfectly. The second volume of Umbrella Academy, but other times it was like, this is just making it harder to get into. So for the most part, books that are doing that, we're not covering because I get annoyed with them. And Die did some stuff. Like you got glimpses the first time in Die and whatever. Well, if you, by the way, spoiler warning for every book we've covered so far.
Die is mostly a flashback thing where you jump back and So, but no, there are themes that we cover, but I think you're right. There's an elegance to the simplicity in Outpost Zero, and I think for me it goes back to the idea of it makes it easier to read, easier to comprehend. Easier to comprehend the story if the story mechanics don't get in the way. And I think this is a story where they don't want the mechanics to get in the way. They don't want that to be the story. They don't want that to be what the story is about. So it is very straightforward. You're not worried about these time jumps. They're not filling pages by going back and showing. They're not going back and showing the audience, the reader, more information than the characters have. because that's what I was talking about. This idea of, I could see a version of this series where every single issue opened with like 3 or 4 pages of a flashback. And the first one starts at the very beginning, maybe when that ship crash lands. And then issue 2 is a little further down the line. Issue 3, you just get these glimpses and you see the colony take shape concurrently with the story we're watching. But that is giving us more information than the characters, because it's clear the characters don't know their whole history. Something's being shrouded from them. At some point, there was a turn where the people in charge decided to cover something up, probably to the point where the people in charge no longer know what they're covering up, because it's been 200 some years. So they don't know what they're protecting against. They just know they're protecting something. It's that kind of thing. Yeah. That there is a lack of institutional knowledge on the specific level. Like, we don't know what the secret is, but we got to hide it from something.
Well, and I think the interesting thing is it seems like Sam and Aaliyah are not even really interested in covering the past as much as they are the future, like discovering the future, at least Aaliyah. Now, I know they're looking into the past.
Well, I think Sam is, because he has that hologram. He wants to know more about these people,
which is the opening page of the book, right?
Yes, yeah, and that's his motivation. So I think Sam is focused on that, and Aaliyah is like doesn't care. All she cares about is what they can find to help the colony thrive in the future. So I think there is a push and pull there, but it's still I think the story benefits by not having those flashbacks again, because we learn things the same times that our characters learn things. We're learning things the same time, and specifically the same time, basically, that Sam and Aaliyah are learning them. Our young protagonists, our adventurers, when they find the key information, that's when the reader gets it. So we're all on the same page. You're moving along the story with them, and the characters aren't playing catch up to us. And I think that works for a book like this.
Yeah, 100%. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, I've got really nothing else to say about this. I loved this volume. Eager to talk about the conclusion.
Yeah. I think it sets up some really cool things. I think finding, learning more about the Gen ship, which is what it's called there, and seeing the various reactions of like Mitchell and Liz when they find out what Sam and Aaliyah are doing, and again, the inevitable reveal to I'm going to say the adults in the room, but the inevitable reveal, to some adults, in terms of how are they going to take what Sam and Aaliyah have found. How are they going to take it in the way of like, no, we got to shut this down. This doesn't help us.
It was hidden forward. For a reason. Exactly.
Yeah. And again, the idea that they might not even know why it was hidden. They just know you don't go down there. You don't venture here. This is not what's important. Or are they receptive to it? And how does that information, how is that received in how is it potentially received in the society as a whole? How does everyone else take that? So no, I think there's some good setup in the future there. And it's exciting I think they lay good groundwork here. They lay good groundwork without treading water. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah. And some people are like, a lot of the reviews I was reading were written before the series was wrapped. Mm-hmm. And some people that were complaining were like, this feels like such a slow burn. This could go on forever. Mm-hmm. And me, holding the whole book in my hand at one time. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I know about the intentionality and the pace here. And I know whatever they're doing is a relatively small scale story. Like there's not going to be a Death Star blowing up at the end of this.
Yeah. There's not. And there's not a lot of fat there too. You think with 14 issues, there's not a whole lot of extraneous stuff that they're going to be pretty lean towards the end. They're going to focus on what's important, and they're going to get to the point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't think we said anything in particular about it this time, but really beautiful artwork throughout this volume.
Of course. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Actually,
a few new paneling like that. Okay. Yeah. So by the way, that song that she listens to in her little AirPods at the beginning, where the lyrics are all over it.
Yeah.
That's not a real song, right?
It is not. No, I think there's a
Okay, I was like
letter.
Googling those lyrics, and it was
I
like
think there's a
the Island of
letter.
You by Miley Cyrus. I'm like, I don't know. I don't listen to Miley Cyrus.
There's a letter in there, in the back of that issue, I think, or in a subsequent issue, someone asked about that, and I think McKeever was like, no, some issue maybe about song licensings or whatever it is, and end up he wrote a song with lyrics that he felt would be fitting. I do like the idea though, and I think this goes back to this idea of lack of institutional memory, that they have these music players but they don't like change the songs, that
Yeah.
you know that and they have like this drill, this stuff that seems super high tech that no one knows how to actually work, like on the
Right,
Discovery
and if
team.
something breaks, I
Yeah.
mean, they don't have extra parts. They don't know how to.
so
they don't have an engineer
exactly. Yeah,
to rebuild it.
well, their engineering team is basically just like trying to retrofit things. They're trying to figure it out. They're reverse engineering things to try to figure out what they need. But they have all this technology that they don't know anything about. And yeah, so they have these, whatever their versions of like AirPods, I guess, although I guess the music is in the earbud itself. Yeah, they can't change the music. They're stuck with whatever was preloaded on there. So no, I think that's interesting there. But I think that the one note I did have that I managed to skip over was I really love what they do with the lettering when we see Maddie. The idea that is, that this visual representation that she's kind of out of it, that they're,
Oh yeah.
it's kind of squiggly, not just the lettering, but the word balloons itself, which is that's a very typical thing that's done whenever someone's kind of in an altered state or whatever. But I still love seeing it and that kind of detail put in that it's not important what she's on, but you just see her text and that she's not with it.
Yes,
I mean, that she's not speaking the same way everyone else is. That she's in some sort of altered state, and I love seeing that visually. I love when that detail is put in.
Well, and just, I mean, another one that it's just like one of those things that when it goes well, we forget to talk about it. The lettering overall.
Yeah.
The layout. I have never once had to hesitate and think about what order to read things in. I have never wondered once who is saying something. Now it's easier because there are no narration panels. And I think that's when pages can get crowded. There's all dialogue.
True. There's no text box. That is true. No, I think there is, they're not worried about taking a big swing with page layout, which I think is something that you and I have talked about. I love it when when creators try that. Doesn't always work, but I think it's great when creators play with the form and think, excuse this terrible pun, but they think outside the box. Yeah. And try something different because of the uniqueness of sequential art storytelling. But again, I think a book like this, we go back to this simplicity of that's not the point. This book is focused on telling us this story with these characters. So that's the focus. So they want to get you through the story. They want to get the information to you as efficiently and as neatly as possible. And so you're not worried about, what order panels go in, how to follow the text, the dialogue, anything like that. That's all straightforward. It's all a mechanic to deliver you the story as best you can.
Yeah. And I'll say, and this getting back to the art, but everything is boxed in by this, white gutter and margin, except when you get the occasional splash page, and then they're kind of breathtaking.
Yeah, they go all the way to the page. Yep, they
finally break through the ice, and they say, now for the hard part was the page that I was holding up on camera. Yeah, that no one can see other than you and I. But there's just a few of them. One is, and one's a 2-page one, where she's going through and she gets the view of the bubble.
That's great.
Listening
page.
with her
Beautiful
music.
Page. Yeah.
Yeah. So very cool stuff. I'm guessing with like some of the textures and things laid in that this is all done digitally. The art.
Maybe it could be. I don't know. I don't know how Trafinki works. I wouldn't be shocked though. That's a way so many people go now. So I wouldn't be shocked if it's at least colored digitally now. That feels kind of like what how the industry is going. And I said I wouldn't be shocked by it. But I think that's a great point out. Shout out to those splash pages when they get them, because they fill the page. They go to the end of the page. There's no border, no nothing like that. It's it's a vast expanse, and then so when they do go to that, it's incredibly effective.
Yeah. It does, because it really makes you pause
Yeah.
and say, "Oh my, look at
To
that."
yeah, to actually take a look,
Look at
take
the
a
art.
look, yeah, really focus in on some of the detail and see all of that. No, I think it's great. And again, Trafengi is, for someone who has done so little in the Western U.S. North American comic market. I think his stuff is just breathtaking. I think it's so good. He's someone now that I've got like a season pass for. If I see him on a book now, like I'm going to pick it up because I know it's going to be beautiful. And I think this was his first work in the Western market. I think what he does with character and again on some of those big splash pages with setting and all that, I think it's absolutely gorgeous. He's an incredible artist.
Yeah, well, and shout out to him because he followed us on Twitter and Instagram.
Oh, fantastic.
So,
Well,
I assume that means he wants to come on for an interview.
Absolutely. Although
case,
again,
we'll have our people call your people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he speaks a dozen languages and probably speaks English as like his fourth language, and it's probably better than you and I do it. But no,
even if he didn't,
so
I'd be fine listening to him speaking whatever, and have
That's
it translated
in French or whatever. Yeah, but no, his stuff is so great, and it's a joy. I think it's a joy for me to read this book, love the art, and then to find out much later when we did this podcast that it was his first comic work in the U.S. Like I had no idea.
Yeah,
but because I only read this book because I saw some interior pages. I was like, I love this. I don't care what this is. This is beautiful. I need to read it. And that was my hook. And then I got into the story. So, I had no connection to this otherwise. No other creator that I knew. Just solely on what I saw on the page, the art, and that was enough to draw me in. And yeah, I found one of my new favorite artists in the whole industry. So, it's wonderful when things like that work out in that way.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm super excited for the third one here. I would love to see this creative team work together again. I know it's not even over yet, and I'm like, but 14 issues doesn't really seem like enough. Like, can you imagine?
Yeah.
If like Lemire and Sorrentino had found themselves for their 14, 15 issues of Green Arrow, and then just said, "Okay, well, I'll see you when I see you."
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
No, they sought each other and they found each other, and they are now doing a massive thing that I'm sure will be a large collected omnibus for.
Yeah, no, they keep working together. Yeah, no, it is. It's the kind of thing where you hope that you'd love they keep working. And again, I don't know if I don't think McKeever he's kind of been out of the game. He hasn't written a lot of comics really since Outpost Zero. That was kind of his first work in a while. But his specialty, as we talked about in the Zero, are these younger characters. There's this kind of this YA audience. It's stories about teens, whether they're in superhero settings, regular slice of life settings, kind of a sci-fi setting like this. That's his milieu. And again, with the way that Trafengi draws, it's incredibly well suited to that. Even his best known work being The Good Asian, those characters aren't teens there, but his style just lends itself to drawing those types of characters. I think he's incredibly expressive with his facial work and his acting. I want to see more of it. And if it were written by McKeever, another sort of coming of age story, again, kids on bikes, I can't get enough of it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, point taken with the expressive faces and everything, because just look through this. I mean, just like if you flip through the volume in a matter of 60 seconds, guess what percentage of the panels have no text on them at all? Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's a good dynamic where you trust the artist. You don't have to dump words on every single panel.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I had to guess off the top of my head, I'd say 20 to 30% easily have no words,
about right. Feels
no
about
text
right. Yeah.
on the panels.
At least a quarter there, or very minimal text, where there's a lot. There's a lot being.
I'm not counting like the song lyrics.
Yeah, but
text, but no dialogue.
There is a lot. There's a lot being conveyed in the artwork there, and that's when the medium does. That's what it's supposed to do, right?
Right. It's a visual medium.
Yeah, it's supposed to have both. You don't want to. There are times when you need a lot of dialogue, and there's times where it's useful, but you don't. I don't like to see things being over-explained. There are things that you have to convey through dialogue, but if you can convey it through just a 2-3 panel interaction between some characters, or a sequence of panels of like close up, wide shot, something like that. If you treat it in that way and you think of it that way, and you use the strengths of your artist, I think for both of us, that just enhances the experience. And it's what makes comics a unique storytelling medium that that we love to get into, because you don't get it anywhere else.
Yeah, it's comics being comics, not trying to be anything else. It's when it's not writing for adaptation bait, and it's not trying to be a novel that they put pictures to, which is I always go back to, which is a very dangerous place to go. I always go back to Alan Moore, talking about the Watchmen. When that was optioned for a movie, this was like years before it came out. But when it was optioned for a movie, he very curmudgeonly said, like, if I wanted to write a movie, I would have written a movie. Like, I wrote a comic book. I picked the medium on purpose. Yeah. It's not an audition
for something else.
I don't audition my IP for another medium. This is what I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to say that guy's name. I hear people say Millar.
I normally say Millar. I'm actually not sure why I say Miller there, and I don't know the right way either. But I normally say Millar, Mark Millar. But yeah, that's one of those areas where I actually do agree with Alan Moore. Not saying that you can't have adaptations of things, of comics or anything.
No, obviously, we just finished talking about we just went and saw. We both saw The Flash this past weekend.
Yeah.
And neither of us were even really looking forward to it.
No. I'm all for adaptation. You just have to understand what the pros and cons of each medium are. You have to understand what makes a comic, and what makes a movie or a television show, a live action adaptation, what makes that unique and different. And if you can bridge that and understand the differences and take what you can, but not try to replicate one or the other, that's where it's successful. When you try to replicate things exactly as it is to make it quote unquote feel like a comic book or something like that, that's when stuff fails. You can't just put panels on the screen. That doesn't work. And so Alan Moore is right on that. And
I mean, he certainly has a perfectly valid opinion, and he has every right to feel that way about his creation.
Yeah. Well, as much as I love any adaptations, and there are plenty that I do, nothing is better than the original source. I don't care what it is. The book is almost always better than the movie or TV show. The comic is always better. Novelizations of TV shows and movies, I think, are terrible. I've read a handful, and all of them have sucked. I'm sorry. All of them have sucked.
Although I've heard strangely good things about novelization of Halo.
Okay.
Like from video game to book.
Okay. So
which is a kind of a different one.
That's a different story because I think those are different things, because games are different, because there's an element of choice in games. You can choose, especially more modern day games. There is a storyline. I'm thinking of something like The Last of Us. That is a cinematic game. There's a storyline there, but you are still making choices that can affect the story. So by choosing one and telling the best version of that story, that's a different thing. But yeah, no. So for the most part, speaking generally, the original source, whatever that is, whatever medium it came out on first, is always going to be the best. And adaptations can only they can enhance or decrease from that, but they can never replace it. So you're never going to lose the original. And that's why I'm okay with someone takes a swing and misses horribly on adaptation. Like, it doesn't ruin the original for me. There are a ton of comics that I love that have been made into terrible movies or TV shows, and it doesn't diminish the comic in my mind. It'd be like, all right, someone tried it.
No, that's how I got over the cancellation of Paper Girls. I was like, well, I still have the book, and the book's basically perfect.
I would have loved to have seen what they could have done with Paper Girls going in their own direction that they were going in. That would have been interesting to me, not because I wanted to see them do more of the comic as it was, but because I liked the choices that they made with the characters I already knew, and I wanted to see what they could do with that. That's the thing you miss out on. But yeah, you still have the comic. It's still there. Those 30 issues are still there. That collection is out there. You can go and read it anytime. So yeah, you don't lose that feeling just because someone tried to make it into something else and it didn't work. And actually, something like Outpost Zero, this it feels like it could be a TV show, because there are TV shows like this all the time. This idea of, again, this humanity's last hope, a generational shift, this last arc for humanity, stranded colony, ragtag group of survivors, whatever it is, that is infinite fodder for storytelling.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I think what the only thing that someone wouldn't like is the finite nature of it. They would want it to go as long as it could as a show, and it could. Well, you could spin this off, and it would work fine as a television show about taking these detours and exploring the world, because that's what you're doing on a television show. It wouldn't feel like filler because all you're doing is expanding the world, and you could do so much with this. You could expand it out. There are ways you could go that wouldn't at all, quote unquote, betray the story. It wouldn't betray the canon of the comic. Not that anyone would really care with a book like this if they change some things here and there and tweak the story. But this is the kind of story that gets made on television. Like this could be a sci-fi show or a TNT show like next year, like there could be a story like this, and it would feel completely in tune with shows that those networks and networks like them have done numerous times in the past 5-10 years. Yeah, well, I mean, I think the highest praise you could say about it is that it would draw an audience who didn't even know it was a comic book. And
and that is kind of a backhanded compliment, but you're right.
No, I mean, no. Yeah, like in the best way possible. Like I was talking to someone who didn't know Umbrella Academy was a comic book.
Oh,
they
sure,
just loved the show, and I was like, something that weird. You didn't know that was a comic first. But
well, because
if you Google it, it's all the show.
Well, because there is an idea that comics still equal superheroes,
right?
And so, and obviously, there on some level there are superheroes, there are superpowered people in Umbrella Academy, but it's not a superhero show. It's not a capes and tights show. And so, if it doesn't have that, it's not a comic. I'm sure there are people that didn't know that Paper Girls or something like that was a comic.
I mean, the way it was marketed, by and large, which was very unfair, was that it was like a Stranger Things knockoff. And I'm actually, listen to our Zero episode. We'll talk about who came first.
Yeah, but no, I do think you're right. This idea that this kind of premise and this specific premise of Outpost Zero could work in that way, where you could just watch it and think that it's just an original show, an original idea made for television or whatever, because it is such a ubiquitous kind of concept. But I think this is one where I wouldn't mind seeing it all. I'd totally check it out, because I'd love to see what they could do, because they would have to expand the world, because 14 issues isn't really enough. Just having this one narrative through line of kind of finding out what's the hidden dark secret of the colony really is enough. Like that would be like the first season, and then you'd have to go and
that's
start
really more of
story.
A movie.
Yeah.
To say we got in, we got out, we told our story.
Yeah, so you really have to start expanding the world if you wanted to grow for that. But I'd love to see it, because I think a story like this, again, these are stories that appeal to me. So any kind of version of format we can get them in, I'll take it.
Good deal. All right. Well, read the rest of it. Read Volume 3, Chapter 3, issues 10 through 14.
Yep.
Whatever you have left, read that and join us next week. Until then, find us, interact with us on Twitter, on Instagram. That's it. Twitter and Instagram, and StoryDarks.com. That's what we got.
Hit the website up too. Yep.
Yeah, we may. Website. In case you're ever looking for our social links, or if you're listening to this years from now and Spoutable has taken over for Twitter, just go to StoryDarks.com. We will always have that one, and that'll link to our current socials. But in the meantime, if you're listening to this in 2023, find us on Twitter. We're pretty quick to respond there. We are both, I think, more active than we'd like to be on Twitter.
Yeah, it's still kind of an unfortunate reality that we have to be on it, but yeah.
Is what it is. Anyway, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.
Peace.